what I want to insist on everybody is to just have a lot of fun taking photos and to try out different things, even if they seem silly to yourself or others. And even if they seem crazy, just give it a go, because that's the best thing for creativity, like trial and error. But I can speak a lot about it, and I will definitely do so, but I would actually like to start with an exercise you should all do for yourself, quietly, and then after a few moments I'll ask you what you've seen. And the assignment is to look at this image, and for me you'd have to count how many squares do you see. So quietly count, look as long as you can, and look really well how many squares are there. So let's hear some answers. I would like to point to you. How many did you count? How many? Oh, okay. I'll go to someone who has stopped you. Yeah, that's true. The image got a bit messed up with the pixels, but just to see them as squares, how many would you see?
30.
30? Anybody more than 30? 97, wow, that's the highest I've ever heard. You must be really thinking out of the box. Well, I'd like everybody to just look again and maybe look a bit differently, because being creative is all about not knowing, but looking differently. Don't only use your rational thoughts, maybe change the way you're looking through your eyes. Just maybe if you kind of like squeeze your eyes together, you'll see something happening. So who can tell me he or she has seen more?
More than 30.
Yeah? Yeah? How many? Sorry? Okay, it can be much more if you just look differently.
Maybe 60.
Yeah, then I'm curious, where do you see those extra numbers? Where do you...
I take a frame over there, I look inside, and I also include the outsides of the lines, and then one becomes 2.
Yeah, that's one way of seeing it. And what I've observed looking at this image really long is when you kind of squeeze your eyes, you'll start to see white squares here where the lines mix. So that's just one little exercise in, you know, looking differently at things. Like we tend to always believe like, oh, we know the answer, that's the correct answer, 2 + 2 is 4, we all know that. But sometimes to be creative, you have to just look out of the box. And this is one of those examples. You could even count up to 50, 60, or you had this own way you figured out of seeing in or out the line. So look out of the line is the bottom conclusion for this. But then we get to the photography part. And I also think that making a good picture is more than just pushing the button. And due to my experience of 10 years talking with people about their photographs and saying why some things work and some things work less, I've come up with a few guidelines in which photos work well. And I've set them out for you, so we're going to go through them. And nothing is science in photography, it's all a communication way. It's a way of, through an image, making someone else feel or believe something, or laugh, or just to show them something. And normally you would do that through words, or other people who are creative with writing, they do it through writing. I just happen to have found this medium, and maybe you as well. So we're now going to look at those guidelines which can make a photo special. And I'll start with this one. It's quite an old photo in the 1930s made by Henri Cartier-Bresson, who's a photographer really well known because of his decisive moment. what you see here is a guy jumping over water, and the light coming from the other way makes a really beautiful shadow. And in those days, we didn't have the digital camera, so you really had to understand your technique well to be able to make such a photo. So for those days, this was already quite extraordinary, and it has survived its age. We still know it now. And like I said, the decisive moment is something that a photo can do. Like a drop of milk in a cup of coffee is something you wouldn't observe with your eyes. You see it every day, it doesn't stand out. But a camera, of course, has that technique in the thousandths of a second to freeze something. And that is one thing that can make a photo special, I think. Well, as we all look into magazines, advertisement is just shown to us daily, like hundreds of them, even when we don't want it. What you come to see is that aesthetics and seduction is always a very big factor in photography. We as people, we like to believe in perfection. Many magazines, of course, are Photoshop. It's not all true, but we still love to admire. We love to admire beauty. And a photographer like Mario Testino, who's Italian, he's photographed the big names in the world, Lady Diana when she was still alive. He has definitely mastered this skill of making someone look beautiful, more beautiful even than real life. And makeup plays a big part in that, and of course clothing is always a very strong factor in portrait photography. And the red lips, it's a very seductive image, the way she's leaning backwards. So if you're into that kind of style, the glossy, then you should learn how to do it. And that takes time, but it's rewarding at the end. I mean, most people love to see such a picture. It might not speak out so much meaning, but it works for what it's there for, advertisement. This is a photo based on what I would say humor. You'd have to know a little bit more about it to really understand what it's about. This is done by a Dutch advertising company called Kramers. They won a lot of awards for being very creative in their advertising. There was a Dutch hotel that asked for a new type of advertisement, and they came to Kramers and they said, how can you help us? And the funny thing is the hotel was really not looking in a good state. It was messy. It had the kind of backpackers audience. Like nobody would pay a lot of money to go there. So they thought we can fake and make it look nice, but it's not a very fancy hotel. So what can we do? So they actually took that part out of it. And therefore they came up with, when you check into the hotel, you look like this. And when you check out of the hotel, you look like that. So it's a good sense of humor, and they did a whole series about that, like I think up to 50 photos of people looking like this. So it makes you laugh, and humor is also a good way of persuading. So I find it a bit more original than the previous photo in its originality, in its humoristic way. This is a photograph actually. But is it totally? What do you think? Is it totally photograph, or do you see any other things happening? Of course, the word up there kind of ruins the question, but what do you think?
It's Photoshop.
Yeah, it's Photoshop, but what other kind of type of images do you think are used here? Is it one image, or is it several, or is it all photos?
Like an image of art on the side and the space.
Yeah, it's a really different type of imagery than you would see very often. This artist is very fascinated by African imagery, and she photographs maybe up to 50 different types of subjects to come to such a photo. She would photograph statues, pieces of leather, people's skin, like maybe 5 different models for this one. And at the end she combines it all in Photoshop. And she's one of my favorite. I still want to buy a piece of art of her because it's so creative and it has so much love and passion into it. And you can't really say it's a photo. It's really a photo manipulation of different types of things. And she spent years developing this skill, and now her work is sold in Europe in galleries. So I believe anything you put a lot of love in at the end, you'll get good at it. And she just has that persistency to just be spending in chaos. Creativity first starts with chaos very often. She'll just have hundreds of photos on her desktop, and at the end she combines them into this kind of thing. So at the end it becomes very precise again, but it starts off really chaotic. So Photoshop is another tool that we have nowadays. I can't say myself I'm quite good at it, I've been teaching it for 10 years, but do I always need it for my own photography? Not always, it depends on what's your style, but I can definitely appreciate it when someone's put this much effort in it. So here we come to an image that I'm sure most of you will recognize. It's one of these news photos that just sticks with you. You will not forget it once you've seen it, at least I won't. And why does it work so well? I mean, it's a horrible image, but it still works well. What you see in photography many times is that contrasts work well. And here we have the biggest contrast possible. We have a naked girl crying, we have people dressed with armory, and there's the vulnerability and there's the violence. So it's a big contrast. And you cannot do anything else than from a human perspective you can't feel what she's feeling, of course, but it really grasps you, the sadness and how scared she must be. And this was in Vietnam, when there was the Vietnam War going on. And it really changed public opinion in America, where it was one of the strongest images to appear in newspapers. So for that, I really think also photography can have a strong voice in, apparently, in a way, history, because the public saw this in America and were so shocked by it that they started demonstrating against the war. So if you're that kind of photographer, you really want to grasp what's happening day to day, what are the things happening now, you should really go out there and search for them, or be in the right place in the right time. And I respect people that do that. I wouldn't be brave enough, I think, but they go out there and they do it with risk of their own life. And then there's always that discussion, like, should you take a picture, or should you run, or should you help? Or, well, I think the photographer really helped by taking this picture. So emotion, a photo that grasps your emotion and has a news factor in it, that is definitely something to take in consideration if you want to be a photographer, and news has always been fascinating to you. So we're going to a whole different type of image. It's like the opposite of the previous photo. This one I put in the slides because it's very colorful, clearly. And that is another tool you can work with. Color really shouts at you, especially the primary colors, like red and green and yellow, and here we have blue and pink. It's just so in your face, you just have to look at it. It's used for an advertisement to sell suits, and also the way he's sitting in the middle, everything is very harmonious, very in balance, and central compositions really pull you towards the image. So, clever solution for selling a suit, and also quite creative. Not any deep meaning, but visually it works. So, where it all begins as a photographer is capturing light, and the opposite of light, of course, is shadow. This is a Dutch duo, as we call it. They are always working together, Blommers and Schum, and they are really well known for doing things that are not really what you'd expect if you hire them. Like, they're always doing the opposite. So here they got a job to take pictures for a clothing company, and the model was probably really expensive, but they just end up putting a big shadow over his face, and that's typically what they do. So it's a very sharp line that the shadow gives, and that makes it really graphic, and for that reason it stands out for me. So if you like taking photos, think not only of light, but think of shadow. Like, very often I would tell my students, maybe even put the model in the shadow on purpose and start looking what kind of lines you see there. It can be also equally fascinating as light.